I took the night shift thinking it would be quiet, just me, the road, and the hum of the lights. But then the shadows started to move, even when nothing else did. I saw something on those cameras that shouldn't exist. And ever since that night, the darkness hasn't stopped watching me. It happened 3 years ago, on a quiet highway outside of Lincoln, Nebraska. I was 35, working the night shift at a small gas station that barely saw a dozen cars between midnight and dawn. The place sat alone at the edge of an endless field, the nearest town 10 miles away. My coworkers hated the night hours, so I volunteered. I liked the silence. I told myself it helped me think. That night the air was heavy with fog. The lamps outside glowed in white halos, and the hum of the refrigerators echoed through the empty shop. I had brewed stale coffee, checked the till, and was scrolling through my phone when I noticed something strange through the glass doors. The light above pump 3 flickered twice, then went dark. A moment later, the lamp over pump 4 flickered the same way, as if someone were walking beneath each one in turn. I stepped outside, the cold cutting through my jacket. The parking lot was empty, no cars, no footsteps, nothing but the hum of the power lines. The fog muffled every sound. I stared at the dark lamp, then back toward the building, and for a second I thought I saw movement in the reflection of the glass door, like a shadow sliding across it. I turned around, heart pounding. Nothing. Back inside, I checked the security monitors behind the counter. 4 cameras, 1 for each corner of the lot. Everything looked normal except camera 2. The image twitched, a static ripple across the screen, then the brightness shifted, showing what looked like a human shape standing near the door. I blinked and leaned closer. When I adjusted the view, the shape was gone. I tried to laugh it off. Maybe a trick of the light or the fog confusing the motion sensor. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that the building wasn't as empty as it looked. Every few minutes I caught small noises, the soft tap of the front glass, the faint rattle of the shelves near the back. Around 2:30 a.m., I went to restock the drinks cooler. The fan in the freezer roared as I opened the door. For a few seconds, I stood there, letting the noise drown out my thoughts. Then I heard it again, a scrape, like shoes on the tiled floor just behind me. I spun around. The aisles were empty. When I stepped out from behind the counter, something caught my eye near the entrance. On the wet floor mats by the door were footprints, muddy, fresh, leading inward but not back out. They stopped halfway down the first aisle, ending in a small puddle that was already starting to dry. I checked the lock on the front door. It was still bolted from the inside. No alarm, no broken glass. I replayed the last few minutes of the security feed, nothing but static and a faint shimmer of movement near the pumps. Outside, the fog had thickened, pressing against the windows like a living thing. The flickering lamps painted long, shifting shadows across the glass, and I caught myself watching them, waiting to see if they would move again. At 3 a.m., I turned off the lights in the shop for a moment to reset the circuit. The instant the room went dark, I felt it, a presence, heavy and close, as though someone were standing right beside me in the dark. I froze, holding my breath. When I switched the lights back on, the room was empty. But the footprints by the door were gone. The mat was dry. I told myself I was tired, that isolation does things to your mind. Still, I couldn't help staring at the glass door one last time before dawn. Behind my reflection, I thought I saw another shape, taller, darker, standing just a step behind me. The next night, I told myself I wouldn't let my imagination get the best of me. I came in early, just before sunset, and checked every corner of the station before my shift started. The day clerk, a kid named Alex, laughed when I mentioned the footprints. He said the fog probably messed with the sensors. I nodded and smiled, but deep down I knew what I'd seen. The moment Alex's car disappeared down the road, that familiar silence returned. The highway hummed far in the distance, but around the station everything felt still, like the world had stopped breathing. I poured a cup of coffee and sat behind the counter, watching the monitors. 4 black and white squares. Nothing but the flickering of the outside lights and the steady movement of bugs around the lamps. By midnight, the fog had rolled in again. It always seemed thicker around this place, as if the air itself wanted to keep people away. I leaned closer to the screens and noticed something strange on camera 3, the one facing the pumps. A faint blur moved across the lot, slow and deliberate, as if someone were walking just out of focus. I adjusted the brightness. The blur paused near pump 4, right under the light that had flickered the night before. I froze. The figure wasn't walking, it was standing still, shaped like a person but darker, almost too dark for the camera to capture. I blinked, and it was gone. I rewound the footage 10 seconds. There it was again, a shadow, taller than me, its edges vibrating in the static. I leaned in until my face was inches from the screen. Just before the recording glitched, I saw it turn its head toward the camera. Then the image cut to white noise. A cold shiver ran down my back. I told myself it was probably a bug or dirt on the lens. Still, I couldn't ignore the damp feeling in the air, like the temperature had dropped 10 degrees. At 1:15 a.m., I stepped outside to check the pumps. The fog swallowed me almost immediately, the light from the building fading behind me. My boots crunched on gravel. I circled the lot, no footprints, no sound. Yet every time I turned my head, I swore I saw motion at the edge of my vision. When I returned inside, I noticed something odd on the floor near the entrance, muddy streaks, long and uneven, leading toward the stockroom. I followed them slowly, heart pounding. The air smelled of damp earth, heavy and sour. The stockroom door was half open. Inside, boxes were stacked against the wall, and the old freezer motor buzzed. I turned on the light, expecting to see some raccoon that had slipped in. Instead, I saw nothing, only a trail of water drops glistening on the concrete floor, stopping right at the back wall. I crouched to look closer and noticed faint smudges on the wall, like fingerprints, smeared in dust. Someone had pressed their hands there. I touched the spot. The concrete was cold, almost wet, even though there were no pipes nearby. When I went back to the counter, the monitors had gone black. Every camera feed was down except one, the outside pump view. On it, I could see the fog swirling unnaturally, spinning in a slow circle as if the air itself was moving. I tried adjusting the settings, but the controls froze. Then, for just a second, I saw something that made me forget to breathe. The door behind me opened on the screen. But in reality, the door beside me hadn't moved. I turned around, half expecting it to swing open, but it stayed shut. When I looked back at the monitor, a figure was standing inside the building, right behind the counter where I sat. A tall, dark outline. No face. No features. I spun around. The space behind me was empty. I could hear only my heartbeat and the faint hum of the refrigerator. The monitor flickered again. The figure turned its head toward the camera. Then the screen went dark. I unplugged the system and sat there in silence, gripping my coffee cup so hard it nearly cracked. The lights buzzed overhead, flickering like before. I stayed still for what felt like an hour. At 3:30 a.m., the power flickered again, and I decided to check the door one last time. As I walked across the floor, I noticed the mat by the entrance, soaked through, as if someone had just come in from the rain. But it hadn't rained all night. I opened the door and looked outside. The fog had lifted slightly, revealing the stretch of road ahead. Everything was empty. Yet as I stood there, the light above pump 3 blinked twice, then stayed on. When the morning shift arrived, I didn't mention any of it. I just told them the cameras were glitching. Before leaving, I checked the monitor one last time. The footage from 2:14 a.m. was missing entirely. The screen skipped from 2:13 straight to 2:15, as if that minute had been erased. Driving home, I couldn't shake the image of that figure on the screen, the way it stood behind me, watching, silent and still. By the third night, I was already dreading going back. I sat in my car for a few minutes before the shift started, watching the fog roll low across the parking lot like a living blanket. The lights from the pumps pulsed softly through it, bending and stretching like something alive. I told myself it was just fatigue, maybe lack of sleep. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that the shadows around that place weren't behaving like normal darkness. Inside, everything looked exactly as I'd left it, too perfect, too still. The coffee pot was half full, the stool creaked when I sat down, and the same song played faintly on the radio. I tried to act normal. Checked stock, refilled the candy racks, cleaned the glass. Anything to make the hours pass. Around midnight, the hum of the refrigerators began to sound uneven, like a low moan rising and falling through the walls. I turned the radio off to listen. The sound faded, replaced by static from the ceiling speaker that connected to the security system. Then, beneath the static, I heard a whisper. At first, I thought it was interference from a trucker's radio. But then it grew clearer. A single word. My name. Mark. I froze. The voice was faint, almost blending with the hum of the power lines. I stared at the small speaker on the ceiling. Mark. Long pause. Then a breath, close enough to sound like someone standing right beside me. I turned every light on in the store. The buzzing fluorescent bulbs filled the place with cold white glare. Still, I felt like the air itself had weight. My reflection in the front glass looked pale and distorted. Behind it, I thought I saw movement again, like a shadow passing just beyond the door. I forced myself to check the cameras. All four were working now, though the quality looked worse than usual. On the lower left monitor, something shifted near the back hallway, the narrow corridor that led to the staff restroom and the breaker box. It wasn't a person exactly, more like the outline of one. A shape darker than the dark around it. The whisper came again, but this time from the intercom microphone near the register. A hiss, then a soft sigh that seemed to travel across the speakers from one corner of the building to another. I unplugged the system, but the sound didn't stop. It echoed faintly through the ventilation duct, moving from left to right, like someone pacing above me. I picked up my flashlight and walked toward the back hallway. The walls there always felt colder, damp even. My boots made soft echoes on the tile. When I reached the end of the corridor, I noticed something strange on the wall, thin streaks of moisture running downward, almost like condensation. The smell of metal filled the air. Then I heard breathing. Slow, controlled, not my own. It came from the dark restroom at the end of the hall. The door was slightly open. The flickering light from the main store barely reached inside. I could see the mirror over the sink reflecting part of the doorway, but nothing else. Hello? My voice barely came out. No response. Just the faint drip of water from a faucet that hadn't been turned on in days. I took one step closer, my light trembling in my hand. The beam caught something in the corner of the mirror, a shadow standing just behind me. I spun around, heart slamming against my ribs, but the hall was empty. When I turned back, the restroom door was now completely open. The mirror reflected the hallway perfectly, except for one detail: my reflection wasn't moving. I stood there breathing hard, but the man in the mirror stood still, staring at me. His expression blank. Then, slowly, his head tilted to the side. I stumbled backward and hit the wall. The lights flickered overhead, buzzing louder than before. The reflection blinked once, and the glass cracked down the center with a sharp pop. I turned off my flashlight, desperate to make it stop, but the darkness around me started to move. Not fast, not wild, just slow waves of shadow sliding across the walls like liquid smoke. They seemed to pulse in rhythm with my heartbeat. I pressed my back to the wall, staring into the shifting dark until I could make out shapes, arms, shoulders, faces forming and dissolving in the black. I ran back toward the counter and slammed the hallway door shut. The whisper followed, quieter now but closer. It wasn't coming from the speakers anymore. It was in the room with me. Mark. The voice stretched my name like it was testing how it sounded. I turned up the radio to drown it out, but the signal cut into the same low static. I could still hear it underneath, whispering just below the noise. By the time the sun began to rise, I hadn't moved from behind the counter. I kept every light on, staring at the entrance, waiting for something, anything, to step through. Nothing did. When my shift ended, I walked outside and looked at the reflection in the glass doors. The sunrise painted the fog in orange light. For a moment, I thought I could finally see my own face clearly again. But just as I turned to leave, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. In the reflection, behind me, the dark shape was still there, standing perfectly still, watching. By the fourth night, I had already stopped pretending that what was happening was in my head. The whispers, the shadows, the broken cameras, it all felt connected somehow. When I arrived at the station, the air smelled different, like burnt oil and damp concrete. The sky was darker than usual, the fog thicker, clinging to the ground as if the night itself was alive. Inside, the hum of electricity was uneven. The ceiling lights flickered in a strange rhythm, buzzing, then pausing, then buzzing again, like something was interfering with the current. I tried to convince myself that the building was just old. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the reason. At 12:15 a.m., the lights began to fade again. One by one, each bulb blinked out until the store was left in near darkness, lit only by the glow of the monitor screens. Then the power cut completely, leaving the whole place silent except for the soft ticking of the clock. I grabbed the flashlight and headed for the back. The generator room was down a narrow stairway behind the stockroom, a place I'd never liked going to even on good nights. The walls there were stained with age, and the smell of diesel hung thick in the air. The floor felt damp under my boots. When I opened the metal door, a wave of warm, stale air hit me. The generator was still humming faintly, struggling, like it couldn't decide whether to stay alive or die out. The beam of my flashlight moved across the pipes and metal casing, revealing streaks of black soot on the walls. And then I noticed the marks. Handprints. They were smeared along the concrete, dark, greasy, and uneven, as if someone had dragged their fingers through oil and pressed them into the wall. Some were small, some larger, overlapping in a strange, frantic pattern. I ran the light over them again, trying to find logic. Maybe the maintenance crew left them? But the station hadn't been serviced in months. The generator coughed and sputtered. The sound echoed through the small space like a deep breath being taken in the dark. I crouched down to check the fuel valve, but as I did, the flashlight flickered. The beam jumped, shaking wildly across the room. For a brief second, it landed on the far corner, where something moved. It wasn't a person, not fully. A shadow detached itself from the darker wall, tall and wrong in shape, like it had too many edges. It didn't move toward me. It just shifted, as if the darkness itself was breathing. Then the flashlight went out. The silence that followed was unbearable. I could hear my own breathing, fast and shallow. And beneath it, another sound, slow, deliberate steps scraping across the floor. My heart felt like it was climbing into my throat. I backed toward the door, reaching for the handle, but before I could touch it, the steps stopped. Then came the whisper, not through the speakers this time, but from right behind me. "Mark." I turned and saw nothing, only the outline of the generator and a patch of shadow that seemed too thick to be real. I swung the flashlight again, but it refused to turn on. Something brushed past me, a gust of warm air, like a breath against my neck. And then the generator died. The sound dropped away completely, and the darkness closed in like a physical thing. I stumbled back up the stairs, slamming the door behind me, but the smell of diesel and burnt air followed. In the hallway, the emergency lights flickered weakly, casting long, distorted shadows that stretched across the walls and ceiling. They weren't still. They were shifting, bending, as if trying to pull themselves free from where they were cast. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight app, but the battery was almost dead. Still, it gave me enough light to see that the trail of handprints didn't stop in the generator room. They continued up the hallway, fresh ones, slick and black, like something had followed me. My phone buzzed suddenly. A notification. But when I looked at the screen, it wasn't a message. It was the live feed from the station's camera system. I hadn't opened it. The image showed the counter upstairs, the front of the store, and me, standing in the hallway, holding the phone. Only I wasn't alone. Behind me, In the faint reflection on the glass of the cooler door, there was another shape, taller, completely still. I looked up from the screen. Nothing there. Looked back again. The figure had moved closer in the feed, now only inches behind me. I dropped the phone. It clattered to the floor, screen flickering. The sound in the hallway changed. It wasn't footsteps now but a low dragging noise, like fabric sliding across the tiles. I ran, half blind, bursting through the door into the main store. The lights came back on just as I reached the counter, flooding the place with harsh white light. Everything looked normal again. No noise, no movement, no figure. Just the faint smell of burnt oil hanging in the air and the ticking clock behind the register. I stayed there, shaking, waiting for dawn. When morning came, I forced myself to go back to the generator room. I needed proof that I wasn't losing my mind. The handprints were still there, but now they were dry, grayish, like old stains that had been there for years. Only one thing looked different. On the wall near the fuel tank, someone, or something, had written 3 words with a fingertip in the soot. Still with you. By the time the 5th night came, I had already decided it would be my last. I told myself I'd finish the shift, collect my pay, and never come back. No job was worth the feeling of being watched in every shadow. Still, when I parked outside the station just before midnight, the building looked different. The windows were black, like mirrors. The sign above the pumps no longer glowed. The place looked abandoned, though I knew it wasn't. Inside, the power was flickering again. Only half of the ceiling lights worked, and the air felt thicker, like the walls were holding their breath. I tried calling the owner, but the line was dead. The radio played static, no signal on any station. It felt as if the rest of the world had gone silent. I started my routine anyway. Swept the floor. Checked the fridge. Counted the till. The normal motions helped for a while, until I noticed something that froze me completely. The cameras were on, but none of them showed me. 4 screens, for different angles of the shop, and on each one the room was empty. I waved my hand in front of the counter camera. Nothing. I walked toward the door. Still nothing. The monitors showed the same scene, an empty gas station, perfectly still, with the lights flickering softly above. A deep chill spread through my chest. I felt the urge to leave right then, but something about the silence held me in place. My reflection in the front glass caught my eye. For a moment, I thought it was normal, but then it blinked, even though I hadn't. That's when the lights went out completely. The entire building sank into darkness. Only the faint red glow from the exit sign remained. The hum of the refrigerators died, replaced by a sound I'd begun to dread, a low, dragging breath that wasn't mine. I reached for my flashlight, but it didn't turn on. My phone screen refused to light. Everything electronic was dead. And then, from the back of the store, a faint shuffle of footsteps. Slow. Heavy. Coming closer. I called out, "Who's there?" No answer. Only the sound of something brushing against the shelves, sliding along the floor, getting nearer. I backed up behind the counter, staring into the dark aisle. Then the generator came alive on its own. It roared from below, shaking the floor. The lights flickered back on for a split second, and in that flash I saw it, something standing at the far end of the aisle. A shape, taller than any person, entirely black but not like a shadow, more like the absence of light itself. The moment the lights cut out again, the thing moved. I heard it closer, almost beside me now. The air pressed cold against my skin. I turned toward the glass doors, trying to escape, but my legs barely responded. My breath came in short, shaking bursts. Then a voice spoke from somewhere behind me. "Don't leave, Mark." I froze. It wasn't a whisper this time. It was clear, deep, and close, too close. I turned around slowly, and for the first time, I saw its face. It looked like me. Not a perfect copy, paler, darker under the eyes, mouth twisted slightly as if it was learning how to smile. It stood a few feet away, staring. I stepped back until my shoulders hit the door. "What do you want?" I managed to say. It tilted its head the same way the reflection had done before. "You stayed too long," it said, voice breaking like static. "Now you see us." The light surged again, bright and blinding. I covered my eyes. When I looked back, the figure was gone. The building was silent once more. But in the reflection of the glass door, I saw movement. Behind me, dozens of shapes forming in the aisles, rising from the floor, from the walls, from the very shadows themselves. All of them shifting, reaching. The glass began to vibrate under my hands, a deep rumbling sound filling the room. I ran for the hallway, but the door wouldn't open. The walls themselves seemed to move, the dark spreading across them like oil. My vision blurred, my ears ringing with the hum of the generator below. The last thing I remember is the lights flashing again, and the world turning white. The next morning, the day clerk, Alex, arrived just after 6. He found the front door locked from the inside. The station was silent, the lights still on but dim, flickering softly. He walked through every aisle calling my name, but no one answered. Everything was in its place, except the footprints. They led from the counter to the back hallway, stopping halfway at the door to the generator room. The handle was cold, wet to the touch, and when Alex tried to open it, he found it jammed. The police came an hour later. They forced the door open, but the room was empty. The generator was off. No sign of struggle, no sign of me. The only thing they found was my phone lying on the floor by the counter. The screen was cracked, but still glowing faintly. On it was a single audio recording saved at 3:47 a.m. The voice on the tape was mine. It was calm, almost whispering. "They're here. They move when the lights go out. Don't stay." The last second of the recording caught a low noise, like breathing close to the microphone, before it ended in silence. When the police reviewed the cameras, the footage stopped at exactly the same time, 3:47 a.m. The screen froze on one frame, me, standing in the middle of the store, facing the camera. Behind me, a dark shape, just visible at the edge of the light. Then the feed went blank. The station was closed the following week. It's still there today, off the same empty stretch of highway. Some nights, drivers say they see the lights flicker on for a few minutes before dawn. And if you look closely through the glass, you might see someone standing at the counter, watching.